and by works was faith made perfect. The scripture was fulfilled, which saith, Abraham believed God, and it was imputed unto him for righteousness. And he was called the friend of God. You see then how that by works a man is justified, and not by faith only. Likewise also was not Rahab the harlot justified by works, when she had received the messengers and had sent them out another way. For as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead also. You may be seated in the presence of the Lord. For a few moments on this morning, I want to talk about faith that won't work. I want to talk about faith that won't work. My brothers and sisters, when we look at this epistle that is penned by James, he starts in chapter 2, or in chapter 1 rather, by letting us know that he is writing to some 12 tribes, or these 12 tribes that have been scattered. In other words, he is writing to people who are at a point where they are challenged in their faith. They have now been moved from familiar territory into unfamiliar territory. They are now in a place of struggle and hardship and difficulty. Their faith is being tested and their faith is being tried. They're not much different than you and I, because on this faith walk that we are on, we will find ourselves in seasons of our lives where our faith is being tempted and it is being tried. And I started this year off because God placed it upon my heart by dealing with you and putting before you to finish. That God has begun a good work in us, and he that hath begun a good work in us is able to perform it until the day of Jesus Christ. Our job is to finish. We are to finish. We are to work out our own salvation with fear and trembling. We are to finish. But I need you to understand that in our efforts to run this race to its completion, that we have to learn how to build endurance. We have to learn how to endure some things in this faith walk. So the text starts off by letting us know that James is writing to some people who are challenged in their faith, who are challenged where they are. And maybe I'm preaching to some folk in here this morning that may be challenged where you are. Maybe you've been in a season where everything you touched was blessed. Everything that you spoke, God didn't let it fall to the ground. But now maybe you find yourself in a season where everywhere you look there's trouble. Everywhere you look there is something to deal with or to be dealt with, and it is challenging you in the area of your faith. These are the people that James is writing to. He's not writing to the world. He is writing to believers. He is writing to these tribes, to these Jewish folk who have now been scattered amongst Gentiles. He is writing now to folk who have been pushed out of familiar territory into unfamiliar territory. But notice James does not have a pity party with them, but rather he encourages them in their faith. He does not feel sorry for them, but rather he encourages them. And I want to do that this morning for you. I don't want to take the time to make you feel comfortable being sad, but I want to encourage you in your faith. Can I tell you that you and I in this walk of life, we're going to have trials and tribulations. But I want you to be of good courage. I want you to be strengthened in your faith. I want to push you in your faith. I want to challenge you in your faith. And James begins to do that with these believers by telling them to count it all joy when they fall into diverse temptations. He says, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience. In other words, the trying of your faith builds endurance. You and I, my brothers and sisters, need to understand that if you and I are going to finish, we've got to have some endurance. Y'all don't hear me yet. I'm suggesting to you that if you start this race thinking that you're going to finish with the same way you started, without going through anything along this race, you are sadly mistaken. You'll quit and you'll give up if you don't learn how to build some spiritual endurance. Somebody say endurance. You got to understand that James now does not feel sorry for them, but rather he tells them to count it all joy. He says, because what you're going through is really building your endurance. In other words, he says that when you are tried, when your faith is being tried, it is building endurance in you. And you and I, my brothers and sisters, need to learn the value of the trials and trying of our faith. You remember Peter began to talk about in 1 Peter that the trials of our faith are more precious than of gold. In other words, he assesses value to what we go through. And while we count it as trouble and nonsense and things that we think as the people of God we ought not have to go through, Peter tells us that what we go through is more valuable than that of gold. And I'm trying to tell you, my brothers and sisters, that we would not be who we are if we hadn't been through what we've been through. And the fact of the matter is, what I thought I would have quit on, now because God took me through it, not only will I not quit, but it has built some endurance in me. And there are some of us who are in here that we're not moved like we used to be moved by trouble, because we've been through so much that we have built some endurance. And so when it comes, I just deal with it. I just learn how to get down and pray. I learn how to call on the name of the Lord, because endurance has been built through my difficulty. And so notice that James begins to teach them and to tell them to count it all joy when they are tried, when their faith is tried, because it's working patience. And he encourages them to let patience have her perfect work, that they may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing. He begins to talk to them, those who are the people of God, about enduring